G'day everyone, welcome to another Toon Under podcast, the Southern Hemisphere's original and best podcast for all things Newcastle United. Before we start, if you like what we do, give us a follow on our socials at Toon Under Pod, wherever on Twitter and Instagram. If you like what we do, also comment on the video, subscribe as well. And without any further ado, tonight we've got a special guest. This man is an author. He's been in charge of Milk Cup finals, FA Cup finals, Charity Shields, European Championships, the Olympics. He's a former boss of the PGMOL, which is the referees body in England, and he's on the list of one of the top 100 referees of all time. We have a big Toon Under welcome for Mr. Keith Hackett. Keith, how you going?
Wow, what a welcome. I'm delighted to be on the show.
Fantastic. It's great to have you. I think it's really really interesting. Like we always hear things from opposition supporters and obviously our own supporters as well. But it's really good to hear the thoughts of someone else who's on the pitch with all the other players, which is a referee, which you very rarely hear from. They're a bit of a, I guess, not a protected species, but a bit of an unknown quantity where they don't really get the chance to speak up as much as they'd like. So I'm really looking forward to our chat. And now you've sort of a bit removed from the industry, you can take the shackles off a little bit and give us and our viewers and listeners a bit of an insight into the world of refereeing. I guess we'll start at the start. It's probably a good place. Tell us a bit about yourself. How did you get into refereeing and things like that?
I started playing at grassroots level, took a referee's examination and passed. And then with no intentions of refereeing, my view was I wanted to be more knowledgeable about the laws as a player. But hey, I got a call. I refereed a football match, enjoyed it. And it went on from there, from 1960 through to 1995, 96, when I retired. In that period, as you mentioned very kindly, I had 23 years refereeing at the elite level, the Football League, the start of the Premier League in England, refereed all the big competitions, became a FIFA referee and spent 10 years on the FIFA panel, refereeing around the world. Did a stint in America for 8 weeks, refereeing in the North American Soccer League. Then when I retired, I became a UEFA referee expert, advising them, helped to write the UEFA Referee Convention, which was a Bible in which referees could be managed, developed. I became a referee assessor, coach, and then the development manager when I managed to convince the Premier League that they needed professional referees. So we moved into that professional area. I didn't want to live in London. Philip Don took over the general manager role. He held that for a couple of years, and then I took over and was responsible for changes in refereeing. I introduced the communication kits. I'd seen those in rugby, how successful they were, so introduced them into football. I stimulated the debate and then started to work with Hawkeye on goal line technology. I brought into refereeing sports science. We had sports psychologists, nutritionists. We, in effect, went totally professional. In that period of time, I developed a relationship with a colleague, Ted Kearney, who lives out in Brisbane, and a guy called Rod Pelosi, who lives in New Zealand. And thanks to the Australian FA and Queensland FA in particular, Ted was able to bring a number of referees over here to experience the PGMOL setup, to understand what professional refereeing meant. And I'm pleased to say that one of those, Gerard Gillett, probably a loss to Australia, but an outstanding referee now on the Premier League and taking the big games, making it look easy. Perhaps at some stage, Chris Beath came across as well. So we had that relationship. I think that's fallen by the wayside when I sort of retired from the role to take up journalism and various other things. But it was for us an experience having Aussie referees across and being able to understand, and for our guys to say, look, it's difficult to develop as a referee in Australia, but hey, there was one outstanding referee coach in Ted Kearney who lives in Brisbane to this day that even I learned an awful lot. Teddy's short on words, but actually accurate to the point. So that relationship continues in terms of the dialogue.
Yeah, that's great. It's actually I might jump forward a little bit. It's funny you bring up Jared Gillett as well, because just before he moved over to the UK, we were lucky enough here in Australia with the A-League that they did release some audio from him and the VAR actually talking about a decision and how that conversation sort of transpires. And I'm not sure if you guys actually seen it over in the UK or not.
I have.
I found it really, I found it really insightful. And I think we've had a couple of questions as well, like on our from our Twitter. One was from Andrew Lovett as well, and I had it written down. Was given the I guess the sort of black curtain with VAR where you don't really know what's being talked about, and fans obviously think they've got conspiracy theories against their own clubs and this and that. And do you think that's one improvement that could be made, where that audio is actually live and all the viewers on TV can actually listen to that conversation and hear how they actually come to a conclusion with any decision?
I think for me, it's a no-brainer. I was at Twickenham watching England getting thrashed by France a couple of weeks ago. I'm not a great rugby union fan. I just went to listen into the referee and watch how he communicated. I was totally informed. As a guy who doesn't fully understand that game, I knew fully what was going off. And therefore, it's a no-brainer for me that several things should happen. I think the first thing should be that the semi-automated offside system should come in, because that operates at improved speeds over broadcast speeds, and artificial intelligence will improve the decision-making process. Against that, just as an aside, if we look at the development of goal line technology, which has worked, and the reason it works is it's got 7 cameras around each goal, operating at 500 frames per second, going into a computer, and the decision says goal, nothing else. The referee doesn't have to react to anything else. So it's very clear in its operation. When we come to VAR...
And it's quick too.
Yeah. When we come to VAR, there's several things for me, it's not operating well. And, we saw clearly elements in recent decisions over the weekend, as we see almost every week. So I think, first of all, the panel of VAR operators themselves should be independent. I think this might be former referees. I wouldn't be too averse to having 1 or 2 ex-players in that role, believe it or not, although people think that's crazy.
But no, we had a few questions about that as well.
Yeah. Well, the reason I make that point is that when I took over the PGMOL, the people who were assessing the performance of referees were former referees. And everybody's saying, that's policemen refereeing policemen. Come on, get real. And so I introduced a panel of match delegates who were made up of referees, former players, and former managers, who went to the game and assessed the referee's performance, along with an assessor. So there was a balance in that equation. Hence me taking that one step further and saying, this is why I think the odd 1 or 2 should be on that VAR panel. Now I come to the rugby element. I introduced the communication kits because I heard and saw them in operation at rugby. I watch rugby and I believe very strongly that the entire process should be part of the entertainment. Fans have a right to be informed as to what is going off, not stand in a stadium thinking what's going off. And Gerard Gillett, for me, underpins everything that is good about the process when it is transparent. That clip said it all for me, that you've seen, that I've seen, of Gerard asking a question very succinctly, very clearly, and getting a response from the VAR. That is what has got to happen. The nonsense, you know, I sit in the stadiums occasionally, and then a goal is scored. I don't cheer in the way that I used to. I wait now. I sort of there's a pause. So there's sort of it affects negatively on the enjoyment. And you know, if we look at the weekend, and I just talk specifics, we had a new player, a youngster that's gone through all the structure of Newcastle United and all that means, because this is, you know, this game is not robotic, it's human, it has passion, it has, and even passion from referees. You might be interested to learn. We're passionate about the game.
We will get to that.
We go into the game wanting the game to go well. We want players to express themselves and show their skills. And we play a part in keeping that game flowing, hopefully. So here's a situation where a player is in an offside position, right? That is not an offence on its own. A defender goes to kick the ball, to kick it out of play, away from the attacker.
Yes.
That is clearly a deliberate play. The ball is crossed, Newcastle score, right? A very good goal is ruled out because of either the incompetence of the referee or the operation of VAR. But between the two of them, they've got it wrong. So what should happen is Howard Webb is now in charge of the referee setup here in England. That is, you know, we all want goals. The game is about goals, winning and losing, and the passion that goes into it. So when a goal is choked off, there has to be a clear interrogation of the process, the law knowledge, and the outcome. And it was wrong. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the match officials got it wrong. What you have to ensure as the boss of the PGMOL and any refereeing structure is you do not repeat an error. So is the shortfall one, the knowledge of the law in the match official? Well, that shouldn't be the case. Do they fully understand the action? Why did they not think that that was a deliberate play? Because if they believed that to be a deliberate play, the goal would have stood, right? So that's the real crux. Now, the focus has to be, one, the VAR came in. So the VAR is saying, have another look. Take a look, because I think this is a good goal. That's what I think is happening. I'm taking my referee hat on. But the referee almost, and a young referee on the list, almost goes, has he had sufficient time to look at it? Why does he overturn the decision? Right. So now we get to a point of the accountability that must come in. One, an explanation through a process by the PGMOL to say, look, we got it wrong. This decision is wrong. That then
has that happened?
No. But it did on my watch. And the reason it did the reason it did in my watch is that people might disagree, and often they do. But the reality is that I think if we communicate the positives as well as the negatives in refereeing, the audience, first of all, become better informed, and we get away from the growing clamour that worries me sincerely in refereeing about integrity. Fans should never, ever, certainly for English referees, question their integrity. There are loads of systems in place that check things. You know, I provided them with the mobile phones. Yeah, that allows me to check every phone call that is made by them. Their internet is paid for, their laptops are paid for. And if you saw the interrogation of decisions by the betting companies that are in close communication with the Premier League, you will see that the integrity issues are not on the horizon or anywhere near English refereeing. What is competence. And when you get down to competence, you have to think about the initial process of a referee, and that is to see. If you don't see something, you know, if somebody steps off a pavement and you don't see them, your car hits them, they're in hospital. And it's those hospital things that you have to avoid. So what you do is you need to see, and your awareness is broad. You then recognize that person is going to step off the pavement. In that situation, you make changes. Your brain says, I've recognized, and then you act. You might slow down, you might stop, all those sort of things. No different in refereeing. You see, you recognize, you think about it, and then you act very quickly. The real crux is, and where I support, and the reason I support VAR is in the modern game with it moving at speeds, you know, and the quality of passing that you get. There are going to be occasions when the referee does not see, he's not in the right position, he's not got the right viewing angle. And I've examined lots of decisions by referees. And when there is a shortfall, it's invariably they've not seen the incident. And that is why, in the development of refereeing, I brought in sports science. It was to actually say, and a running coach, you know, and we looked at the movement profiles of players and where did we match. And so in England, the average, in my period in office, the average distance a referee covered was 11.5k. We knew that 1,000 meters was at 7 meters per second, which is a high-speed run. And we knew that the average of sprints moved from an era of 20-odd up to 50. We gained that because we changed our style of training from endurance, distance, to actually explosive sprinting to come into line with the game and to maintain contact with the game.
Yeah. So when you say, like, when you talk about your training and things like that, and the vision, and sometimes they can't see, like you can't see sometimes, like players might block your view of an incident as well. Like that's unfortunate, and that's where VAR can actually come in handy. But when it comes to training and stuff, how do you train as a referee? Like, is there obviously there's that fitness component that you just spoke of as well, but when it comes to decision making and things like that, is that more of a visual sit down on the computer, analyze, look at a challenge and things like that? Because I'd imagine that how they see it on the ground is a lot different to how it looks on a TV camera as well. So how does that how do you get the training for that?
Well, let me look at the first of all, the physical side. The physical side is that they're given training programs. The sports scientists are given training programs. They wear a polar heart monitor. That information. So they're not with the referees every hour of the day. So as a consequence, the referee is given a daily training program, and that might be high intensity. It might be recovery. It might be medium intensity, and it depicts the sprints, the warming up processes, and all that comes into that. That is measured on the polar heart monitor. That information is then downloaded on a daily basis, downloaded to the sports scientist, who then measures and ticks off that he's satisfied that that referee has carried out that performance. When it comes to the area of decision making, this is about training the law, but also the application of the law. So invariably, the way I used to do it, I think it's still the same, is that you would, let's say this weekend, we had that decision that involved Newcastle. The referees come together every 2 weeks for 2 days. So we would have a number of clips of either positive or negative aspects of refereeing. Those would be put on the, so the referees are in a group. The referee involved in that decision would be expected to talk through how he came to that decision process, discussed amongst referees. Then the group leader, in this case Howard Webb, or it was me in the past, we would actually then analyze that and stimulate the debate. But before that, what we also do is that, you know, one of the areas in decision making and the difficulty of a referee, for example, on a foul challenge at feet level, is it careless, for which it's a free kick? Is it reckless, free kick, yellow card? Or does it endanger the safety of an opponent? And so what you have to do is you take a series of clips that I've prepared, that I know which is a free kick, which is yellow, which is red, and then you start to examine. So, for example, you will use current clips always, and you will look at, say, the challenge that endangers the safety of an opponent. You look at the player, the speed and intensity of the player coming into that challenge. If he's got 2 feet or 1 feet leading and he's off the ground, he's actually off the ground, that is an indicator to the referee that this is going towards red, because he is out of control. He can't stop. He can't change direction. It doesn't matter about the landing zone. He's endangered the safety of an opponent. He doesn't have to hit the player, you know, and he can't use the ball as an excuse. So as a consequence, those are the things you do. Now, what you also do is you take a series of, with the referee coach, the coach will then take a number of clips, take those away and do one-to-ones with the referees. You'll go to games, watch the performance of the referee, look at the shortfalls in that performance. Was his motivation correct? Did he manage the players effectively? At the same time, the former player, the former manager, would also have a discussion with the referee, saying, you know, maybe at times you'll be surprised, because sometimes the ex-players will come in and say, I don't think you were tough enough, boy. You let the players control you. You've got to get hold of them. And those sort of comments come through in referee. But in reality, when it gets to the VAR situation, you're then doing a similar situation, looking at clips and making decisions. You're throwing decisions almost like the pilot in a flight simulator. You know, planes rarely crash, but every pilot has to determine how to cope with a problem that arises in an aeroplane. That is the same type of training that you do with the VAR operators. You're then measuring from a fitness point of view. You're measuring and are aware of the distances they've covered in their game, how that relates to the game itself. You're doing weight checks, you're doing skin fold tests. I introduced a vision scientist. So they're getting visual checks as well as peripheral vision, reaction times, and then a nutritionist. So one of the things that happened early doors was we took on a group of amateur referees and made them professional. Some of those guys, you know, like Mike Dean, worked in a chicken factory. You know, he was earning about £12,000 a year, and all of a sudden, across the table, I'm informing him, "You're going to be professional, and we're going to pay you £35,000 a year." So the lifestyle of these guys changed, and we, you know, with some we had to teach them how to use a laptop. So we had such a mix of individuals. We had police officers. And what we did in those informative years was to say, right, okay, if you wish to work 20 hours a week, you can do, in order to continue your pension arrangements and not lose out from a pension point of view.
Yeah.
But now they're generally full-time.
Yeah. Did you ever, I know over here in the AFL, so what they do here is sometimes the umpiring department will send umpires to a training session, and they'll actually umpire a training session. So the players get used to rules, and sort of gives the umpires another avenue, I guess, as well, to that sort of umpire or referee in real time without the pressures of decisions and things like that. Did you ever think about, or has there ever been conversations to do that?
Oh, that happens. First of all, I brought in with the full approval of the Premier League at that time, the managers of the clubs had to come to an annual meeting, which at that meeting we would explain the laws of the game, the changes to any laws, how we would operate, interpret those laws. We would say that the other aspect would be that what are the areas that are concerning us? I'll give you an example. The growing trend of simulation and how clever the players are and how referees are getting duped. And, I literally said, look, we need your help because, look, the image of the game is tarnished by cheating. And therefore, in that sense, 1 week you'll get a penalty kick and another week you'll get a one against you. It's not a penalty. It shouldn't have been. So that creates a better atmosphere. Then the referee and his coach will go in with the players and referee a football match. So that is part of the norm. And and the role of the boss of the PGMOL is, if we had controversial incidents, then I'd be on the road meeting the manager and discussing those. And sometimes negative, sometimes heated discussions, but I was man enough to be able to say I could cope with those things. But the reality is, I'll give you an example. We had there was a situation where David Moyes, who was then the manager of Everton Football Club, he was unhappy about his player Fellaini, who'd just come in from a team from Belgium into Everton. And I think 10 games on the bounce, he got yellow cards. And I examined before I went to Farm Field and their academy system, I looked at each one, and out of the 10, 2 were incorrect. So I did the matrix. I went to the training ground. Fellaini, the player, was there with his interpreter because he couldn't speak English very well.
Yeah.
The manager and the first team coach were present. On the screen, we looked at each one, and I think they were a little bit surprised that I was saying, look, number 1 and number 8 on this matrix of 10 is incorrect. I can't defend it. The referee's got it wrong. And we can get into a remit that, there's a general view that only referees make a mistake in a game of football. The reality is players make mistakes. It's a human, we all make mistakes because we're human. That's the very nature of it. And of course, within the laws, there's a degree of subjectivity, which also complicates it, the issue. So they're not always finite in terms of a black and white decision. You have to bring in the subjectivity on it. But in reality, we were able to demonstrate that the yellow cards were correct. The reason why, and one of the reasons, and I'll go in a little bit more detail, is that Fellaini, new to the Premier League, was having trouble adapting to the speed. He was being told by his manager, to get close to the opposition, by that almost in touching distance. And what that did was it reduced the amount of reaction time for that particular player. The attacker got away from him, and what he did was either trip him or pull him back, which was because he stopped a promising attack, it's a yellow card. So that was the type of learning example that I can give you that actually reduces the number of yellow cards. Because one of the things that I was also concerned about was our average yellow card count was in the area of about just short of 5 per game. And I targeted 3 per game. And how did I do that? Because with the sports psychologist, I could look and talk about improvement in communication. It might interest you to know that if you look at the communication between, say, a player and a referee, but this is also naturally in the scenario, when we look at it and examine it through science, we know that only 7% of impact comes through the communication, the voice to a player. 55% is through body language. So then what we so then what we have to do in refereeing is to actually say, how can we use our facial expressions? How can we use our physical presence, our body actions, to actually reduce the temperature? Now let us take that incident that many of your viewers might have seen. And the talking point in England this week was Mitrovic, who very unhappy with the referee's decision, even before it had been almost given, grabs the referee. He turns him, but he's held the referee, and he's then in the face of the referee. Chris Kavanagh produced a very quick red card. By the way, he got everything right in that scenario. The red card 100%. For denial, the manager dispatched, and so he's right. But the learning point for Chris Kavanagh would be, how could he avoid the conflict with Mitrovic? Now, this might be a difficult task, but what we say to referees,
it's a very difficult task.
Yeah, but what we say to referees, instead of coming back away from it, face it by taking one pace forward, lean forward, and hold your hands out and say stop. And so those are the learning points that young referees can draw from that action of Mitrovic this weekend. It's not all negative for him, and hopefully he'll get a big ban. But the reality is, we as referees, even though the action is the correct one by the referee, can also learn how can we prevent, how can we avoid, because ultimately the game wants to have 22 players and is part of the entertainment.
Yeah, so it's actually a good point. You've sort of ran into my next question, and NUFC Apple on Twitter also had the same question. With regards to that Mitrovic one, 100%, like that it's totally not on, and I'm sort of the opinion if you put your hands on an official in any capacity, it's a lengthy ban. It's just a no-go zone. But how does that differ? What's the difference between that and the Bruno Fernandes?
Well, let me tell you where I'm standing or sitting. Absolutely none. I start off.
That's how I've seen it as well. But
I start off, and we have to start off with a point that says a player or a manager or a coach or a member of the technical staff cannot place his hands on a match official. It's sacrosanct. So you have that starting point and a very clear understanding. So when we get to the Fernandes, I don't go with the argument that Fernandes was a soft approach and Mitrovic was a hard approach. Both handled the referee in a different way, but they put hands on referees. So for me, I would want to know from the assistant referee and the referee and VAR why the outcome on the day was not a red card.
I don't think it was anything, was it?
It was nothing. So I then say, is that a shortfall in the training of the PGMOL? Have I, if I was the boss, have I communicated that effectively to match officials? Have I communicated that to the game as a whole, the teams and everything else? to make certain everybody's aware. Now what we do is, because they've taken no action, I was extremely disappointed and went into the press saying quite clearly that the Football Association has let the game down by not underpinning the fact that this is an offence that should have deemed a punishment. And this, because nothing happened ultimately by the FA, in a sense, they too have let the game down. Now, I know that they're under constraints. The constraints that the federations or football associations have is that FIFA do not like referees to authorities and organisations to re-referee a football match. They want to generally leave it in the hands of the referee. But, for me, I would like retrospective punishment brought in for acts of simulation, because that would act as a deterrent. So they liquidized, if that's the right word, a deterrent by allowing the Fernandes hands-on not to go punished, not to be punished. That sent out a message to fans, just a mate, it's Manchester United, they get away with it. And Fulham, no doubt, as a supporter, you're going to be saying, well, Mitrovic, he ought to get away with it as well. Both should have been punished. Both should have been punished.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. So the referee, the match officials in that situation would be receiving operational advice in that audience of referees and assistant referees, because then we say, before they leave the room, where a player puts his hands, you will punish. Let me give you an example of this in the past. I made it clear that our interpretation in the English Premier League was that if a player put his hands in the neck and face of an opponent, however that was, if you like, applied, no force, just the actual contact, that would be a red card offence. And when we applied that, we informed the teams, we informed the players, the managers, everybody. It killed it for a bit. We didn't have it for that action by players because they knew where the line in the sand was drawn. And that is the important aspect of it. Yeah.
I think that sometimes there is incidental contact, like players run into officials unaware, and that happens, and that happens in the game. But we are talking about when players do grab the referee, basically when the game is dead, whether it's a free kick or an incident or whatever it is, and the game stopped. That's a no-no. Like obviously, incidental contact happens, and in a sport that's 360 degrees, things like this happen. People get caught out. People don't look where they're running, and things like that. But any hands-on it's just a no-no, and it's not just. It sort of starts at the top, and I believe it needs to send a message all the way down to junior referees and things like that. That this can't be tolerated, and Mitrovic will cop his whack, which is rightfully so, and whatever he gets, people will say it's not enough, people will say it's too much, but he's going to get a lengthy ban, which is deserved. But I do think that they do need to set the standard, with especially the Fernandes incident, to say, no, this isn't on, and maybe, like you said, a retrospective sort of look at it is a way to go. More, I want to tap into your brain a little bit. When you went into a match, depending on the teams and the players involved, and once you've sort of done that for a little bit, did you go in with a plan, like for a game, like knowing who you're going to be officiating during that game?
Yeah, I mean, during the week building up to a football match, a team will go onto the academy ground and it'll practice corner kicks forever. Referees prepare in similar ways. How do we actually execute 9.15 meters, 10 yards from the ball? How can we improve our management of that? How can we be proactive in ensuring that throw-ins are taken from the right position? How do we move on the field of play in terms of the movement of the game? All those things are taken into account, but you also take into account, and of course, you build up your experience of the teams that you're playing. Let me give I'll give you an example. When I refereed at St James's Park, I knew that it was always a difficult ground to referee on because of the swirling wind. There was a wind, an open Gallowgate end, and it sort of created a swirl at times, which made it difficult. And you had to be aware of that, because sometimes the ball that's going to be played for might be missed because of that. It's a small point, but you prepare. You know that. I'm going back now. You knew that if you were refereeing someone like Peter Beardsley or Malcolm MacDonald, they were likely to get fouled, but you built up the knowledge that these guys wouldn't turn around and react. They would go, I'll take the knock, I'm going for goal. So as a referee, that type of knowledge enabled you to have confidence in keeping the game flowing, allowing that foul to take place, and allowing the game to continue. As a result, you might get other games. So there's that side of it. There's the playing surface aspect, the quality of the pitch and all that goes with it. But you prepare, you know your players. If you don't know your players, then, and you know your captains. Some you could trust, some you couldn't. I'll give you an example. I was refereeing at Old Trafford, and they'd just taken on 2 Leeds players, Joe Jordan, a Scottish international, and Gordon McQueen, Scottish international. They joined from Leeds into Manchester United, and I was aware that Joe Jordan was a player. Because he played for Leeds, I rarely refereed him, because Leeds is about 30 odd miles away. So at that time, I wouldn't referee. It'd be out of the remit. But I watched, and therefore what you saw was Joe Jordan, when the ball was coming towards him, would drop his arms in front of his chest and bring his arms and control the ball with his hands and arms. And he wasn't getting punished for it. So on this occasion, I'm aware of that, and it happened. I'd blown for a free kick. Joe Jordan's not happy, and he's heading for me. And he starts expressing to me his concern that I got it wrong. To which I sort of say, it's a free kick. It's going to be a free kick every time. And he went on. And I suddenly said, Joe, you're banned from Stringfellas nightclub as of now. Joe Jordan looked in complete and utter amazement until Gordon McQueen ran across, and Joe Jordan says to McQueen, this referee's just told me we're banned from Stringfellas nightclub. And Gordon McQueen says to him, you're obviously not aware, Joe. I should have told you that Keys, that's me, the referee, his brother, my brother John, is a director of Stringfellas nightclub. And so I'm trying to give you an example, probably not a good one, of how you can communicate with players on the field of play, and how you can develop a knowledge. Let me give you another example. And Paul Gascoigne, right? We all know Gazza, an outstanding player. When Gascoigne was in the technical area as a sub, he wasn't selected for the first team. I'm telling you that every minute that went by, the temperature of Gascoigne went up to the extent that when he was brought on, the first thing he did was clatter somebody big time and get a yellow card. And I think on the odd occasion, get a red. Total frustration that he's not selective of the team. What did we do as a group of referees? We decided that if that was the case, we would go to the touchline and we would say to Gascoigne, as he's coming on, run alongside him and say, Paul, how is it that you've been a player of your quality, been a sub? That can't be right. Is your manager for real? A quality player? In that minutes of conversation, less than minutes, seconds, you've actually taken some of the heat out of Gascoigne. As a result, his response wasn't to kick 7 bells out of the next player that was in vicinity, but actually to play football.
Yeah. I've got a couple of quick ones on, given we're a Newcastle podcast, so we'll keep it Newcastle related.
Yeah, sure.
Who was the hardest Newcastle player you'd sort of had to referee in your time?
Oh, I think that's a really good one. I think that invariably, at times, it could all be difficult. There was some outstanding players.
Was there one who just really gave you the shit?
No, there wasn't really. No, I think there wasn't, in truth. I can remember one occasion, I talked about it recently, and that is I was appointed to referee a Sunday game, noon kickoff, and I arrived, and it was the weather had been appalling. And I arrived at the ground. There was a guy sat on the steps, soaked to the skin, with a Newcastle scarf around his neck. And I said to him, I don't think the game's going to be on, mate. And I picked him up. I didn't pick him up physically. I said, right, come with me. And I go into the stadium, go to my dressing room, throw him a towel. Newcastle guys come in and say, look, you're going out onto the pitch. Yeah, I said, I'm just going to put my boots on. And the guy says to me, you need Wellingtons, mate. You don't need boots. I walked across the pitch and it was flooded. I came off. The Newcastle have given this guy a shirt. They've given him a tracksuit bottom. They've looked after the supporter who's soaked to the skin. Thought that was great by them. And then the assistant chief constable comes into the stadium, into my dressing room to inform me that the game will go ahead because of police security arrangements. And I've gone, no. He goes, I've already been in touch with your bosses, the Football League. You're going to play. I walked out back on the pitch again. My two colleagues, two linesmen as they were then, Keith, this is horrendous. The groundsman's unhappy. And then I pressed the bell. We're coming down the tunnel. I'm waiting for everybody to come out. It's pretty close at Newcastle, or was then. They come out, and Keegan looks me in the face. He's the manager, and he goes, "Are you for real?" I've gone, "What do you mean?" You can't possibly be playing this match. Our guys have had to change the kit. It's that wet. Talk to the chief constable. Don't talk to me. I've got a game to referee. And I go out on the middle, toss up. The two players look very enthusiastic. They're looking at me as though I've dropped out of a planet. And I said to the guy who's kicking off, facing the Gallagher end, don't kick it on that left-hand side because it's flooded. And he kicked off. The ball dropped into what was a pond, not a puddle. And the water came out of it. Look, we got through the game. Those are the sort of things in refereeing where both sets of teams put in 100% effort. And, afterwards, you didn't normally, but people were knocking on my door saying, well done, ref. Have you, all those sort of things that made the game. Supporters had a great day on that occasion. But it's the sort of things you remember about Newcastle. But I did work in that area for a couple of years. I'll just tell you one story. I worked in that area for a year, 2 years as a consultant in Newcastle. On one occasion, I was running the factory and the works manager brought up to me, two guys. one in black and white stripes and the other in red and white stripes, and they'd had a fight about in the factory about who was the best centre forward. Fashion.
Yeah. I'll go the other way. Who was probably the best player from Newcastle that you refereed in your time?
Yeah.
Not more in your opinion.
Oh yeah, I mean, I always liked Malcolm McDonald, but I also liked Peter Beardsley. Then there was the fullback, blonde-haired fullback. Can't just grab his name at the moment. And he
was it Barry Venison?
Yes. Well, it was. I'm not sure if it was Barry Venison. He was a Sheffield-born kid. It'll come to me in a bit. But the reality is that I always liked the ones that put in the great deal of effort. There were others who were, you know, sometimes the odd one that was difficult, depending on the decisions that you gave. But I always enjoyed going to Newcastle.
Yeah, they're all like that. Yeah. Now, I know I'm speaking from a Newcastle point of view, but I'd imagine there's 19 other clubs who would do exactly the same thing, where the media release comes out sort of later on in the week as to say, whoever it is, if it's Jared Gillett's been assigned to your game, is going to be the referee for the upcoming weekend's game. And I think every supporter just goes, "Oh, I can't believe we've got this bloke." Like everyone's the worst one and stuff like that. Do you have a view who you think is the best sort of referee in the Premier League at the moment?
I think that in England, we haven't got the best group, in my opinion. I think that I think that's the change of management style. It's not me. It's me reflecting. I think that, in my era, we had 10 really world-class referees. Clattenburg was obviously one of them. Halsey, Paul, Webb, with outstanding referees. The two standout referees at this moment in time are Michael Oliver from Newcastle and Anthony Taylor. Gerrard is moving up quickly in the ranks. He's a solid citizen. What concerns me is that I don't think they're giving him sufficient games. I'd like him to be, frankly, if you're like a good player, if you're picking the team, you pick a player and he's there every week in and out. And that's no different. That's how it used to work with me with refereeing. If the referee performed well, he would get a game the following week. I think sometimes we've got Gerrard who is getting games not as frequently as I would have liked and how I would have used him. I think Darren England is a referee that shows a great deal of promise. I think people who are really nice people like Andre Mariner is coming to the end of his career. I think he's lost the pace that's required, the speed and intensity that's required at the Premier League level. He's got very good. He makes up with it in some instances to his experience and reading of the game, but I can catch that. The fan might not be able to, but with my eagle eye as a referee developer, I can see that. I think some of the new kids, I think some of the new referees are lucky to be on. If I'm honest, I think they've been brought on prematurely. I don't think they're quite up to the standard, but that also reflects down below, because at the championship level, I think that the whole organisation over here has suffered through succession planning, and I think an organisation works with its like a business. How strong is the middle management? And I think that it's so important that the PGMOL have a strong core of coaches, referee coaches, who say it as it is, who offer advice, that advice is absorbed, and therefore the pressure is put on the referee to actually perform to 100%. So the reality is that they've got to react. I mean, I can measure a referee by how he reacts when a goal is scored, how he reacts when when a substitution is made? Does he understand that there might be a tactical change? And does he adjust his style of refereeing to accommodate that? The movement profile might change. Does he suddenly get lulled if it's 2-0? He thinks the game's up. In fairness to Chris Kavanagh this weekend, coming to the end of the game, he was alert and he had to deal with 3 red cards in the space of a minute.
Yeah.
He was alert. And, he's not had many games. He's had less than 10 games in the Premier League this season. So either he's been injured or he's been out of form. So all those things play in. Preparation is so important.
Yeah. We'll finish off with a couple of questions that we've had sent in on Twitter. And it sort of touches on what we spoke about before. This one's from Marcus Didius Falco. And he's just asking, what kind of ongoing evaluations do the referees get to sort of keep their Premier League status, I guess? How do they go about that?
Pretty thorough. First of all, the system that is used now is that the game is assessed very carefully. In my era, I had a product called Prozone that analysed position, distances, speeds, accuracy of decision, all those sort of things. So they're looked at very closely in terms of their overall performance, and within that, the breakdown, the application of law, management of players, how they work with their team, how did they have big decisions? For example, in my era, if we had what is a key major incident, let's say an error of the nature of the one involving Newcastle, like offside, the maximum mark that they would have got out of 100 by that would have been 59 in my system. So it really punishes them from a matrix point of view. So that performance is analysed. They will look at the referee coach will analyse the clips. They'll look at the movement very clearly. What's the movement profile like? How's he dealt with the players? And then there is a matrix of a table. I'll give you an example. So if you take 20 referees, you've got assessment marks 1 to 20, and you've got delegate marks 1 to 20. So you've clearly got. Yep. So if you've got the top 4, let's say the top 5, you've got 4. You've got quartile A, B, C, and D. So you could have a referee that's in quartile A, assesses, and D in the delegate role. So he's technically competent, but he's not very good at managing players and decision making. So you see how so that process works. And midway through the season, if you're in that bottom 2, 3, you get a warning letter. You're employees. So and with that warning letter, I have to demonstrate as the boss that you're getting increased training, covering the points that you see that are weaknesses in that performance. Ultimately, as in my era, and it might have changed slightly now, but in my era, if a referee was in that bottom quartile and maybe the bottom 1, 2, or 3, then the reality is he would be demoted, and in some instances that would be the end of his career. So let us make no mistake that there is an accountability that runs, but with it there is law that covers employment law in this country, in England, as it does in most countries, and you have to fulfill that. You have to demonstrate as a company that you've actually carried out all the necessary work and procedures to assist that individual to be competent in the role that he's doing. Yeah,
which is good. We'll have one last one from a big fan of the show, Dimitri, just regarding VAR. What do you think the threshold should be to change a decision? Because when it was brought in and we were told it was going to be for clear and obvious errors, and sometimes you see referees standing at the monitor for sometimes up to 3 to 4 minutes trying to decipher. Like, if it goes that long, is it clear and obvious, or is it sort of, where have we gone past that now, where we just need to try and find the right decision regardless of how long it takes.
I think what is important is that the boss of the PGMOL here in England determines very clearly with his referees and the VAR operators what is clear and obvious. And they get a, if you like, a standard remit that it's clear and obvious. And Howard Webb has gone out in the public in recent weeks, and I think explained it extremely well. If a decision slaps you in the face that it's wrong or doesn't look right, that is one that needs to be the subject of a VAR review. And because I think that one of the things that VAR has done in England is it's created a group of lazy referees. And I think this is in Europe as well. You know, you've got a situation where there's an over-reliance. I'm not going to make that decision. VAR will make it for me. So he's got to change that mood to say, referees, you make the decision as you see it, you call it immediately, as and when. And VAR, if it slaps you in the face, you're coming in. You're coming in.
Yeah.
And I think that has to be the remit. Perhaps in the future it will expand beyond that. Who knows? But I think ultimately what we've got to do is, and the reason I'm calling for a review, a panel of VAR specialists, is because that's what I did with assistant referees. I make them specialists in their role to do that job, and they become more competent. What we've got is you could have Michael Oliver refereeing at Old Trafford on an evening kickoff on a Friday night. And he's not going to get out of the ground until close to midnight, right, with a review and various other things. And then what you do is you see Michael Oliver VAR on the Saturday at noon kickoff. Now that for me is an absolute no-no. And that is what is happening at times. So you've got a guy who's then got to drive, you know, he's not in a bus, the team coach like the players. He's got to drive himself from Manchester to Middlesex, London, 180 miles, 170 miles, in order to do his job on a Saturday. He's not had the right recovery. He's still got the remnants of his game at Old Trafford as an example, and now he's got to sit in front of a screen and work as a VAR. And I think that Howard Webb, who's operated VAR in America very successfully, will make those changes hopefully in the English Premier League.
Yeah, I think they have to, because it's getting to a point now where you need to, first of all, put the best people available to run the VAR, and then have the best people in the best mental state to actually perform their jobs. It'd be no different to a referee during the game. Like, they need to be not just physically in good condition; they have to be of a right mental state as well. And like you said, if they're backing up,
absolutely,
like
you need recovery time.
Not just physically. You need to mentally recover. Like,
sure, absolutely.
Think as a fan, all the emotion, like you said earlier, all the emotion that you go through over that 90 minutes. Imagine the guy that's trying to control it all. Like, it's a lot to take in. And it's totally unreasonable for someone to ask him to perform a big role.
Yeah. I mean, that raises a really interesting point, because when you're refereeing at the elite level, yes, there is a responsibility for grassroots level. What you do at the top cascades down. But at the elite level, you are in effect an event manager. You know, you've got to kick off on time, and that's where you've got to work with television companies in order the timing element is spot on. You know, if you've got, as we have in England, the English Premier League is beamed to 211 territories around the world, with many of them starting without any introduction, just a piece of music straight into the game. You've got to make certain that the kickoff is not 15 seconds early, 30 seconds early.
Yeah.
You know, you have to kick off bang on time. And therefore, there can be time pressures that come into it. But the other area that maybe we'll touch on another occasion, and that is my concern at the moment, is the lack of actual playing time in the English Premier League and across the world. Because if we take the English Premier League at the moment, we're playing an average actual playing time of 55 minutes. The Premier League itself said last year that 3 of their games only had 45 minutes of actual playing time. So for me, the quicker we move to an independent timekeeper and probably change the face of the game a little bit and bring in a countdown clock where the fans again know exactly when the watch is being stopped and when it's been started and how much time there is to go, rather than this secondary guessing now that, I watched a junior game last night, and 10 minutes before the end of the game, the guy was asked, "How long, ref?" And he said 10 minutes and 4 minutes added time. And I smiled at it, because this is in the mentality of certain referees that the added time is fixed. And that can't be the case. That just cannot be the case. No. So for me, I think there's inefficiencies in the timing of football matches that impact on the fans' value for money and the game as a whole that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I agree. I'm all for. I'm not sure the World Cup model was right, where there's 14, 15, 16, 17 minutes of injury time. I don't think that's right. But I think the countdown clock, or even it could be a count-up clock, whether you just play to 35 minutes or 40 minutes, and then the game just stops when the ball goes. Maybe not when the ball goes out, because players can generally be sped up to throw the ball in and receive yellow cards for time wasting. But for substitutions and everything like that, just stop the clock. Like it's a pretty simple. And once it takes out what we spoke about earlier with the VAR conversations that should be heard as well. It takes out that element of conspiracy and how come Man United get the Fergie time? They always get more than everyone else, and Liverpool the same when we played them this year. It sort of cleans everything up, I guess, and it just makes it a lot more.
And it makes the managers tactically more aware that they need their players to play rather than feigning injury and rolling over, holding their head when in fact the challenge was at the feet level in order for the game to be stopped.
Yeah, I agree. But I think we'll wrap it up there, Keith.
Great. Pleasure.
Thanks very much for joining us, mate. It's been an absolute joy to have you. We're very lucky that you agreed to do this and jumped on for us. Like I said, I can't thank you enough. If
thanks
anyone's still would, thanks for listening. Like I said, if you like what we do, give us a follow on our socials. Toon Under Pod. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. It always helps us, and comment and like it as well. Helps us with the mysterious YouTube algorithm and helps us get ourselves out there in and amongst all the Newcastle United podcasts as well. But that'll wrap us up for tonight, Keith. Once again, mate, really happy and stoked that you jumped on with us, mate, and I wish you all the best for whatever else you do for the rest of your career. And
thank you.
Thanks.